TaxAct knows every small business owner has different tax filing needs. With TaxAct, you can file yourself with the help of an expert, or TaxAct can do it all for you. You're the boss, the head honcho, the top banana. And TaxAct is like your loyal, trusty tax aide, ready to pounce on any tax needs you might have. TaxAct is dying to pounce on some small business tax needs. TaxAct. Let's get them over with.
Yeah, folks, literally, we were just saying, welcome to the thatchapter podcast, at how our favorite stories to cover on this podcast, which, dare I say, quite possibly the greatest podcast of all time.
I would say that.
I mean, I am saying it. I have said it. Is the type of story we're going to tell you today. We're just saying this is our favorite types of stories. This is like dark history, spooky, old school horrors. This one is definitely a horror story.
It's, because it's real world and it's like, it's horrendous. And in solidarity with the men that we're going to be talking about today, I haven't eaten since lunchtime.
Wow.
So I'm a little bit peckish.
That's fair. You have done your part
I've
to
done my part.
Experience what it was like for them. Fair play to you, Keith.
Thank you.
Who the bus?
Yeah, do my part. I might be a bit cranky, but we'll get through it.
Yeah, well, you know what? Actually, we do a quick roundup of Malibu Mike's horror movie reviews.
Yeah.
I have not watched any horror movies. I have been slacking, truly. Last movie I did watch was not a horror movie, but it was a horror writer who wrote it. Stephen King, The Running Man. I watched the new Running Man. I think I liked it because I had heard some reviews of the movie that were no bueno. So I kind of went in with low expectations. Yeah. And then I was like, oh, this movie's actually quite good.
Yeah.
Much better. I think I just really thought it was going to be shit, and it wasn't. It's quite good. Yeah, so I'd give it one thumb.
One thumb? Okay.
Yeah, it sticks pretty
out of
closely.
2 thumbs? Or?
Yeah, out of 2.
Okay, because we can join thumbs if you want.
I'd give it I'd give it 1 thumb out of 2.
1 thumb I do, okay, yeah. Solid score.
Yeah, I mean, it's definitely, it's nowhere near as good as the Arnold Schwarzenegger version, of course.
Right, of course.
From the 80s. That's peak. But, no, this is a good movie. I have to say, I enjoyed it. I thoroughly enjoyed it from minute 1 to minute 99, or however long it should be. Because no movie should be longer than 99 minutes. I'm trying to think of what other movies I watched. Nope. Can't think of anything.
Nothing. I've been watching a lot of the Winter Olympics, which by the time this comes out, will be over, and I will be devastated because I've really gotten into it.
Also have been watching the Winter Olympics. You know what I've been astounded by? My new favorite sport is figure skating.
Figure skating, okay.
It was fantastic.
What I do find the Winter Olympics is amazing. It definitely is tailored towards sports that do well in winter. I think they should do the Summer Olympics on ice. That would be fun to see.
Oh man, the 100-meter sprint on ice. That'd be good. That'd be way cool.
The high jump, swimming.
Yeah,
that'd be pretty funny.
Tennis,
high diving,
skating around the place.
Yeah, now that's difficult.
Keith, I think you just invented possibly the greatest sport of all time.
Right, that'd be amazing.
Well done.
So somebody getting that.
Yeah.
Whoever has connections out there.
Exactly. Start doing summer sports in winter conditions.
Yes, that's what I want to say.
That is great.
Give the people what they want.
I want it. And I'm sure a lot of our listeners do too. Alrighty then. Now, folks, let's get into today's story, which we teased you with.
Little taster.
You know what this the saga really reminds me of is a story I covered very early in the podcast days, The Tale of the Batavia.
Yes.
I did a 2-parter on the Batavia, which is still, if I do say so myself, probably best story I've covered, if I'm just being honest.
Yeah.
I think it's a crazy story that is not really well known.
You're only saying it because I wasn't on it.
Well, that's also a bonus. That's what tips it over the edge. But you know what, folks? Go back and listen to that. I think I did a good job on it. I did heavily research it a lot. So I read multiple books.
I did listen. It was very, very good.
Thank you, Keith. Say that again and more synonyms of how good it was, please. But today, folks, is another... and this one is researched by Keith. Wow. Yeah. Look at you.
Look at me.
Keith did a great job on this one. It is the story of the Essex, a true horror at sea. The source for this one, Keith says, is In the Heart of the Sea by Nathaniel Philbrick.
Amazing book. Amazing book. I had to condense his whole book into one episode. There's so much more I didn't even get to cover that I wanted to.
Yeah.
I would definitely suggest read the book. It's amazing. There's so many other facts and interesting things about the history of whaling. Go read it. It's amazing.
All right. Yeah. Well, this episode's not sponsored by Nathaniel Philbrick, so...
Okay, you can cut that out.
Yeah, exactly. Pay us.
Not yet.
Yeah.
Wait till you hear the episode.
Oh, also, In the Heart of the Sea is a movie. I think it's a good movie.
I really enjoyed it.
Ron Howard, Prod production.
Yep.
Good movie. It stars a lot of famous actors.
Chris Hemsworth.
Worst thing about it is Chris Hemsworth's fucking Boston, New England accent. I gotta go to the harbor. That's actually a better version than what he did. It's honestly the worst New England accent you will ever hear in your life. Other than that, though, pretty good movie.
It was a good movie. I enjoyed it. And true to the story as well.
Alrighty day, folks. And you know why we're covering this is because we hear you. We hear what you're saying. Every story we tell is on land. And finally, folks, we return to the sea.
Oh, I have a good joke for you, actually. What's a pirate's favorite letter?
See, I know what the actual answer to this joke is, but you're going to have another joke. No, I know what it is.
What is it?
R.
You think so? But the sea be his first love.
I feel like you might have even told that on the podcast
I probably
before.
did. It's a solid joke.
Okay. You are a dad, so you're in dad joke territory, which and all dads have to repeat the same 5 jokes.
It's the only reason I had a kid.
Yeah. Folks, it's November 1820. An American whaling ship is alone in the vast, empty Pacific, doing what whalers did best, chasing them whales for that liquid oil gold, baby. Now this voyage, though, it felt wrong from get-go. Bad omens, close calls, warnings that should have been enough to turn the ship around while they still could, but they didn't. Instead, they ventured further into open waters, where they had an encounter with a giant sperm whale, who said to these guys from Nantucket, "Not today." And then this whale did the unthinkable. It attacked and sank the glorious and mighty Essex. The crew managed to salvage what they could from the sinking ship and cram into small boats, but that's only when the real horror begins. Months on open water battling dehydration, starvation, exposure, and the slow collapse of the body, and the sexiest muscle of all, the mind. The ocean gave them nothing, it took from them everything, and the choices left to them got darker by the day. This tragedy, it shocked people around the world and later actually helped inspire Herman Melville's 1851 novel, Moby Dick, which therefore, if you think about it, this story could be directly responsible for one global coffee chain taking over the world. Starbucks.
Really?
Well, that's a character from Moby Dick, is Starbucks.
Oh, okay, interesting.
I mean, they probably would have come up with a different name.
Oh, yeah, right, okay.
But you never know. But I'm choosing to believe the sinking of the Essex led to Moby Dick, which led to Starbucks.
Of course, it's a whole thing.
All right, folks, let's give it a go. Folks, we should just say, like we said before with the, what was that one? The Zooville?
Oh, yes, yeah.
Basically, there's going to be animal abuse. I know some of you guys aren't a fan of animals being killed, so just a heads up, a lot of whales get killed. I mean, humans die, but sure, fuck the humans, you know? But no, there is it's whale hunting, so...
Yeah. Speaking of whale hunting, so to understand the world that these men live in and what would drive them to the middle of the Pacific Ocean in search of whales, we need a quick history of whaling. So humans... Whaling. Having a whale of a time. So humans, they've hunted whales for thousands of years, but during the Middle Ages and Renaissance, whaling across Northern Europe, it grew into a serious business rather than, just a food source. So whale oil and baleen, sometimes called whalebone, although it's not really a bone at all, but they were valuable commodities. Whale oil, it was processed from the blubber of the right and bowhead whales and from the head cavity of the sperm whales. So it was used primarily for oil lamps, and then the baleen, that was used to stiffen clothing, so like corsets and hoop skirts and that sort of stuff. Now, commercial whaling in colonial North America, that kicked off in the 1650s, and by the 1830s, America, they were running the game. Whalers, they started by hunting right whales and humpback whales near the coast, particularly in Nantucket. But, like their North European counterparts, they were soon lured further away in search of the sperm whale, named after spermaceti, a waxy white substance found in a large organ in its head, sometimes 500 to 800 gallons of the stuff.
Jeez Louise, that's a lot of... I mean, 1 gallon is like 4 liters. Yeah. Almost 4 liters, 3.75. Yeah. So that's crazy amount.
It's a huge amount. And the funny, the 18th century whalers, they mistakenly believed this was whale semen, hence the name. And Honestly, yeah.
Oh no, I know that it's called spermaceti, so I was like, oh, it's sperm whale. It's just a coincidence. It's sperm. It's like the technical name for it, but they actually thought it was whale jizz.
Which is like
your
crazy.
Jizz, buddy. I'm coming for your jizz.
And like 800 gallons of this stuff. Like, jeez. Like I actually looked it up. I think the most sperm capacity for an animal is the blue whale, and they produce 5 gallons of this stuff. And they were looking at these like, holy Jesus, 800 gallons. But so you see, the sperm oil, it was not just valuable, it was prized. So it burned bright and clean for lighting, but more importantly, it retained its lubricating qualities even at extreme temperatures. So that made it vital for machinery during the Industrial Revolution and useful for things like precision instruments. Its byproducts, they were also used in manufacturing, including soaps and textiles and all that other everyday goods. So it wouldn't be until the 19th century, after many whale species were hunted to the brink of extinction, did whaling start to decline, thanks to the discovery of that clean stuff, petroleum, in 1859.
Oh, thank Lord we found a source that does even less damage to the environment.
I know, right?
We probably should have kept hunting the fucking whales, honestly, because we do have global warming now. It's like whales or this destroying the entire planet. It's a real thinker. That's a story for another day, and I'll let other people debate that one. Yeah. So our story today, folks, it begins on Nantucket, a tiny isolated island off Cape Cod, Massachusetts. English settlers first came ashore in 1659 after purchasing the island for £30 sterling and 2 beaver hats. Two beaver hats? They arrived hoping to farm the land, dreaming of a grassy place where no wolves prowled. But as more fields were carved out and they began running out of space, the locals did what coastal people have always done when the land stops a given. They turned to the sea. By 1760, Nantucketers had all but wiped out the whales in their own local waters, so they built bigger ships and pushed further out. By the early 1800s, they were hunting deep into the Pacific, which is crazy when it's like this small island in New England. They're going all the way, up the opposite side of the world.
Yes, yeah.
You think, would they not just move somewhere closer and be like, we live here now? Why was the people coming from Massachusetts? Yeah. You'd think like the whalers would have been in like California or like San Francisco would be a whaling down.
It's crazy. Yeah, like they had to go like such a far distance. We'll get into it, but like they literally had to go down the full east coast of the Americas, down like they were so close to the Antarctic, and then like have to get over to the Pacific Ocean. It was crazy.
And that's just to start hunting. Then they have to come back.
Yes,
do all that shit again. Their success turned Nantucket into the whaling capital of the world. So much so that even during the US financial crisis of 1819, the island, it was still booming. That year, roughly 70 to 80 whale ships flew Nantucket's flag, with a similar number of trading vessels alongside them, supporting a population of around 7,000. 70 to 80 whale ships, that's a lot of whaling.
It's huge,
That's a lot of ships, and that's just from Nantucket.
Yeah.
I'm sure there was ships from all over, like, coming to these places and doing this sort of shit. So this tiny island did become, in many ways, its own self-sustaining economy. But like most booms, there was a body count. The journeys were only getting longer as the whales were further and further away, and that meant longer absences. Voyages that had once averaged around 9 months stretched into 2 to 3 years, and plenty never came back at all. By 1810, there were a reported 472 fatherless children on Nantucket. Nearly a quarter of women over the age of 23, which was the average age of marriage, had lost husbands to the sea. With the men gone, the women carried the island. They raised the children, kept businesses alive, and held together the dense web of family ties and commercial favors that made the whole place function. And still, despite all this, Nantucketers wore the identity like a badge. Proud whalers, proud to the point of obsession and bloodlust for that sweet spermaceti. Convinced that God himself had granted them dominion over the fish of the sea. The whales are mammals.
That's true.
Over the sea, over them all. They don't care. Herman Melville would later describe these religious pacifist killers as Quakers with a vengeance. I mean, hey, they're Quakers, so they're pacifists, but they're like, they have to get out that bloodlust somehow.
That's true. It was
take it out in a whale.
Definitely a bit of an oxymoron, but
So the Essex itself, let's get to that. One whaling ship from the vast Nantucket fleet was the Essex, which was built in 1799. It was a 238-ton ship, about 88 feet long. But by the time it was ready to set off on its final voyage from Nantucket, the ship was then 20 years old, and it was showing it. There was rot in the timbers and rusty iron fastenings. Ship owners were rarely in the mood to spend money on anything they didn't absolutely have to do, and while the Essex upper decks had been rebuilt, there was suspicion that what really mattered was ignored. The stuff below the waterline. Hey, not my problem. Yeah, if I can't see it, it's not a problem. When the Essex set sail in 1819 on its ill-fated voyage, she did so with a crew of 21 men. The previous captain of the Essex had been promoted to a newer, better ship. So the owners appointed the former first mate, George Pollard Jr., aged 29, to take command then of the Essex. One of the boat steerers, Owen Chase, aged 21, played by Chris Hemsworth in the movie, moved up to first mate, with Matthew Joy, aged 26, played by Cillian Murphy, as second mate. Of the crew, 12 were native Nantucket lads, born and raised in the whaling world, one of whom was 18-year-old Owen Coffin, who was the cousin of the captain, Captain George Pollard. The other 9 people were off-islanders picked up from elsewhere. The ages of the full crew ranged from about 60 down to 14 years of age, the youngest being Thomas Nickerson, the cabin boy, played by Tom Holland. Now, on a whale ship, you did not just have sailors. You had a little hierarchy of lads to keep a floating factory running. Captain Pollard, he ran the ship. The mates, they ran the day-to-day. Then you had the boat steerers, sometimes also called harpooners, who were the absolute workhorses. The Essex had 3 boat steerers on that final voyage. 2 were Nantucket men, Obed Hendricks and Benjamin Lawrence. The third was an Englishman, Thomas Chappell. Then you had the rest of the crew, a mix of seasoned hands and a few proper green hands, which is slang for a new guy who's never worked on a ship before. The kind of fellows who had the romantic idea of the sea in their head right up until the ocean slapped them in the teeth and told them what the job actually was. The job was actually shite.
Big time. And if they thought that the sea was unforgiving, wait until they meet the payroll department. So you see, the whalemen, they did not work for wages. They were paid a share called a lay. So this was a predetermined slice of the take at the end of the voyage. It was written as a fraction, like a 200 lay. So I'll get a 200 lay, which meant you got 1/200 of the voyage profits.
Okay.
Now, unfortunately, some green hands, they were pretty poorly educated, so they insisted on the largest number, thinking it would lead to more pay.
I want 1,000 delay.
Pretty much, yeah.
This reminds me of that thing, remember, what was it, like Burger King brought out the 1/3 pounder burger to compete with McDonald's quarter pounder?
Yes.
But people were too stupid to realize that 1/3 is bigger than 1/4.
Yeah.
So that
exactly
it actually sold less and it failed horribly.
That's exactly what happened, yeah. And like the owners of the ships, they were obviously more than happy to agree, because in reality, the bigger the number, the smaller the share. It's like being offered, as we're talking about, like a quarter of cake and proudly shouting, "No, thank you, I'll have 1/20.
20 is bigger than 4.
Exactly, yeah. Even if a man did not get stung in the negotiations, the lay system could still chew him up. So a voyage, as mentioned earlier, it could run 2 or 3 years, and if its profits were low, a crewman could come home with nothing. Sometimes worse than nothing. Any tobacco, boots, or clothes he bought from the ship's store, which is called the slop chest, were charged against his lay. So you could crawl back to Nantucket after 3 years at sea, and the final accounting will go, right, you still owe us.
Jeez. And then you've got like a wife and kids at home who are probably like starving.
It's true, yeah. And like,
Fucking
what usually happened was to these lads, they'd come home, realize that they're still in debt, and they'd just sign back onto the next ship going out to try and break even.
That sucks.
It was rough.
I would not like to be a whaler.
No.
That would be shitty. And so, with the new Essex crew finally assembled, like the Avengers we got going here, it actually has 2 of the Avengers.
It does actually.
Thor and Spider-Man.
Yeah, the original Avengers.
Yeah, there you go. The next step was loading the ship for a 2.5-year run. First into the hold went these big ground tier casks. These iron-hooped barrels that could each take about 268 gallons of oil. Before they ever saw a drop of oil, though, they were filled with seawater to swell the wood and keep the seams tight for this long voyage before they could finally get to the oil. Around them went freshwater casks, then food, all of it salted and packed in barrels. Then came the gear. You got your harpoons, your lances, your line, your tools, your spare canvas, your medicines, your charts, your instruments, and your spare lumber. And it was not so much a ship as it was basically a floating factory. And hanging off the sides were these whale boats, ready to drop, hunting them whales at a moment's notice as soon as the guy said, "There's a whale over there." Or whatever they say. So finally, it was on August 12th, 1819, that the Essex set sail on what would become its final infamous doomed voyage. And it was a bit of a clumsy start. Leaving Nantucket wasn't as simple as just pointing the bow at open water and then waving goodbye. A whale ship was a complicated beast. The Essex had 3 masts, a bowsprit, and to the new green hands, a complex spiderweb of rigging and canvas stitching the whole thing together. A few of the new lads immediately got seasick, but once the island began to shrink behind them, there was that buzz in the air, excitement, adventure, the belief that they were heading out to make their fortune.
Interesting bit of trivia, Nantucketers had what they considered a sure way to cure seasickness. So what they do is they would swallow a piece of pork fat, which was tied to a string, which was then pulled back up again. And then if the symptoms returned, which I can almost imagine was immediately, the process was just then repeated.
So their whole thing to cure seasickness was to just make themselves like gag?
I guess, yeah, they just dry heave themselves out.
Wow, that sounds awful. So the Essex was bound for the Pacific Ocean, but to get there, she first had to round Cape Horn, the jagged southern tip of South America. And that meant running the gauntlet of the Drake Passage, a notoriously vicious stretch of water between South America and Antarctica. Now, getting to the Cape was not as simple as pointing the ship south and sailing down the east coast of the Americas. First, they had to head out towards Europe and Africa to catch the northeast trade winds. Those winds would sling them back across the ocean again, aimed at South America. But only 2 days after leaving Nantucket, the Essex ran headfirst into what would become a long string of bad luck. On August 14th, the sky grew dark and the weather started to turn. Off to the southwest, black clouds came rushing towards them. A storm was on its way.
Now, throughout the rest of this story, there's a lot of moments where Captain Pollard's decisions are questionable, and this was definitely one of them. So hindsight, I understand, is 2020, but Pollard, he really had a talent for missing 100% of the shots that he took. Basically, he underestimated the storm's strength, so he didn't shorten the sail in time, and they were basically just exposed when the wind hit. At that point, they had 2 choices. They could either point the ship into the oncoming wind and, take the storm head on, or they could turn and run, letting the storm shove them along. Pollard, he chose to turn around, but he made the call way too late. So instead of getting ahead of it, they ended up broadside to the storm when it struck. So they were completely sideways when the wind and the gale force, it just completely just hit them broadside.
Yeah, it's going to do the most damage as it's the biggest part of the ship. And yeah, he definitely misses 100% of the fucking shots he takes, for sure. And
every decision he makes is the wrong one.
For sure. And then a lot of times he'll realize halfway through it was the bad thing and make it even worse.
Yes, yeah.
Yeah. The Essex was violently battered by the storm, slammed by waves and wind. The masts creaked and groaned until the ship rolled nearly 90 degrees onto her side. Men scrambled, trying to shield themselves from flying gear and collapsing equipment, clinging on for dear life. Now, eventually the storm eased. The sea calmed enough for the ship to right itself, but the damage was bad. Sails were torn, some equipment was smashed, 2 whaleboats hanging off the ship's side were ripped away and swallowed by the sea. Looking at the wreckage, Captain Pollard announced they would return to Nantucket for repairs. But his first mate, Owen Chase, he disagreed with him. Owen Chase argued they could replace the provisions that they'd lost at the next island ports. They could then patch up the ship as it went and keep on moving, no need to waste time. And that would not be the last time Owen Chase talked Captain Pollard out of his instincts. And so they sailed on. It wasn't until the Essex crossed the equator, well past Rio de Janeiro, that they finally spotted their first pot of whales. They'd been at sea for over 3 months by then, and once they were within a mile, the whaleboats were lowered and the hunt was on. In a whaleboat, everybody has a job. The mate, or captain, steered from the back, the boat steerer sat up front, ready with the harpoon, and the rest of the lads rowed like their lives depended on it. Now, how it works is that once the harpoon hits the whale begins towing them for miles on what they called the Nantucket sleigh ride. The harpoon, it doesn't kill the whale, it just locks them on to the whale itself so they can stay close to it and then basically stab the whale to death while they're riding alongside of it, and then the men would shout, "Chimney afire," when blood starts spouting. It sounds barbaric because it is barbaric.
It is,
Like, it's not a clean death, it's a horrifying way to kill an animal. You got this huge big animal that's could be hundreds of feet long. You're stabbing it with a spear, which to the animal is tiny through its dense hide. Extremely long, slow, painful way to kill whales. It's pretty horrifying.
Their aim was they were going for like the internal organs. But as I said, like trying to get through that blubber, it was thick.
Yeah.
It could take up to like 15 times of stabbing the whale till they finally hit something that would do some damage. The whale would just end up suffocating on its own blood. And that's when it would shoot out from the spray. It was a horrific way to die.
Yeah. But they did need oil. So we gotta think about that. I mean, how else? If it wasn't for this, we wouldn't have Moby Dick. So,
that's true. That is true. Yeah.
Think about that.
Yeah, give and take. Now, hunting the whale was only half the battle. Next, it was time to butcher the body and process the oil. So once the whale was stripped of blubber, then decapitated the head, which, by the way, the sperm whale, the head was massive. It was nearly 1/3 of the animal. So they would cut a hole in the top of the head and they'd use buckets to bail out the high quality oil. Sometimes a couple of the lads, they would even climb in and scrape out the last.
I remember that's the scene in the movie.
It is,
in the harder scene. It's horribly, it's horrible. It's like incredibly claustrophobic. Climbing into the skull of a whale.
It's grim.
And into the body.
Yeah.
Jeez, I wouldn't have liked to have been one of those lads.
No, nasty. And like spillage was obviously guaranteed, so the deck quickly turned into a slick skating rink of oil and blood. Now before they could finally cut the carcass loose, the mates, they would poke around inside looking for ambergris or grey amber. It was just a weird waxy grey lump of whale. Sometimes it was in his gut and it was used in perfume, but it was worth more than its weight in gold. So the whale just kept on giving.
Damn.
Then came the trying out. This was rendering or boiling down the whale blubber. So the ship, they had the big iron tripods, which they would fill with chopped blubber. So they fired up the pots with wood at first, but once it got going, they skimmed off the crispy bits floating to the top and they tossed that into the fire too. So the whale ended up fueling its own melting, which is metal as hell.
Yeah.
So it was efficient, sure, but the cost was the smell. This thick black smoke, greasy air, and the stench that clung to everything. The night with fires roaring on the decks, smeared with blood and oil, the whole ship looked like a floating hell. And this could go on for days. They set these special tri-watches 5 or 6 hours at a time, so nobody really got much sleep. The experienced lads, they would sleep in their filthy tri-clothes until it was completely done, but the green hands, like they couldn't stomach it, so they kept changing after every single watch, but they ended up ruining most of their clothes. So they had to buy replacements from the ship's slop chest, which of course was at absolutely extraordinary robbery prices.
Yeah. Damn, dude, that sounds awful.
This whole story's grim.
Yeah, that's grim as shit. So by mid-December 1819, the Essex finally reached the waters off Cape Horn. Now, remember, they left Nantucket in August, so they've been at sea like 5 months.
Yes.
4 or 5 months by now. I always am amazed by this. It's like when you read stories from history, how long everything takes.
I know, yeah.
They've just gone from the Nantucket down to the very tip at South America. They're like halfway there, 5 months at sea.
Yeah, it's crazy. It's nuts.
So with the hard westerly winds and the heavy swells of the Drake Passage, it took them then about another 5 weeks to claw their way around and into the Pacific Ocean. But once they got there, their luck with whaling was not much better. Everything on this journey just is horrible. They spent months cruising off the Chilean coast with very little to show for it. It was not until they pushed north towards Peru that they started seeing real success. But even then, it was still not enough to fill the barrels they needed before they could even think about heading home. Towards the end of May, now remember, now they're even closing in on a year since they left home, the Essex met another Nantucket ship, the Aurora. They swapped news, and the Aurora's captain told them about a newly discovered whaling ground more than 1,000 miles off Peru, with enough sperm whales to fill their barrels, and then some. It would not be until October, now we're closing in on a year and a half, that Captain Pollard finally made the decision to set off for this mystical offshore hunting ground, this bountiful place where you put your hand in the water, you'll touch a sperm whale.
You couldn't move for sperm.
But first, they needed provisions. So the Essex made a quick stop off the coast of Ecuador. And it was there that one of the crew, a fella named Henry DeWitt, decided he had enough and he jumped ship. And I don't blame him. They've been at sea for closing in on 16 months. They haven't done jack shit. And he was like, fuck this, right?
This was like the best call of the whole story.
Henry DeWitt, I tip my hat to you. So that left the Essex with 20 men instead of the 21 they started out with. They then sailed on for the Galapagos Islands, stopping at Charles Island and Hood Island to hunt giant tortoises for food. Whalemen, they prized Galapagos tortoises because they were rich meat, and they lasted. They would stack them in the hold, alive. The tortoises were alive. And sailors, they claimed that these animals, they could survive for a year. Sometimes even longer without food or water, just chilling, stacked one on top of the other in the bottom of the ship. Now, of course, that's not true. They were not having a good time then there. The tortoises were just slowly dying thanks to their extremely slow metabolism. Over the next week or so, the Essex captured hundreds of tortoises.
Now, if you thought that was cruel, just wait, because on the morning of October 22nd, a boat steer named Thomas Chappell, he decided to set a little fire prank on Charles Island while the men were out searching for more tortoises. It was the height of dry season. The flames, they just took off, and soon the island was engulfed in flames. So the men who were out hunting, they just about made it back to the ship, but the fire had turned the whole island into a blackened wasteland. Thanks to this incident and everything that followed, the Florina tortoise, it went extinct, and the Florina mockingbird, it survives only on tiny little islets, but they're also still critically endangered. Captain Pollard, he was furious, like proper furious, but sure, nothing takes the sting out of a catastrophe like going back to hunt some whales.
Yeah, that'll do it. That'll sort you out good and proper. On November 20th, about 1,000 to 1,500 miles west of the Galapagos, the Essex finally spotted what they had come for, a pod of sperm whales. Once they were within roughly half a mile, the whale boats were lowered and the chase began. First mate, Owen Chase, and his crew were quickly on top of a whale. But the moment the harpoon struck, the animal panicked and trashed beside the boat. Its tail slammed into the side, cracking open a hole. As water poured in, Chase, he cut the line that was attached to the harpoon, and they headed back to the Essex for repairs for their whaleboat. At the same time, though, Captain Pollard and second mate Joy were already fastened to whales on another whaleboat being dragged around on the Nantucket sleigh ride. Chase was desperate to get back into the action, so instead of a proper repair, he went for a quick patch job. He stretched canvas across the hole and nailed it into place just enough to keep the boat afloat. That's when the cabin boy, Thomas Nickerson, spotted something off the port bow. It was a whale, a huge bull sperm whale, the biggest they thought they'd seen so far. Scarred, blunt-headed, and pointed straight at the ship. It wasn't behaving like the others. It wasn't fleeing. It was floating quietly on the surface, puffing now and then through its blowhole, like it was watching the Essex. After spouting 2 or 3 times, the whale dove, then surfaced again. Its massive tail pumped up and down, slow at first, but then it picked up speed. The water cresting around its barrel-shaped head as it lined itself up on the Essex's port side. Owen Chase shouted for the helm to be put hard up. Others yelled warnings, but it was too late. The whale rammed the ship. Men were knocked off their feet. Deck cargo lurched. Galapagos tortoises were flying about. This was pure chaos on the Essex. The bull passed under the hull, bumping the bottom hard enough to knock away part of the false keel, then surfaced near the stern, floating there for a moment, stunned by the violence of the blow. Instinctively, Chase grabbed a lance, one clean throw, and he could kill the thing that had dared to hit a ship.
How dare you!
And it would be a monster prize. More oil than 2, maybe even 3 normal whales. But he hesitated. The whale's tail was perilously close to the rudder. If it smashed the rudder, they were finished. So he held back. The whale swam out a few hundred yards, snapping its jaws and trashing the water with its tail, like it was winding itself up once again, and it turned around. Chase would say, later on, that it had a look of fury and vengeance. Then it charged. The second hit was catastrophic. The whale struck the ship again near the bow, just beneath where the anchor was secured. This time, the men were braced, but the force still jolted the whole ship violently. Moments later, someone came racing up from below, shouting that the ship was filling up with water. One look down the hatch, it was enough. Water was already above the lower deck, where the oil and provisions were stored. The Essex, it was going down. As the ship sank bow first, steward William Bond, with true foresight, he grabbed some navigational instruments from the captain's cabin before making his way back up to the whaleboats, where the men scrambled aboard as the masts loomed overhead.
William Bond, he was like the true hero of this story. Like they would not have been able to get as far as they could without grabbing that navigation equipment. Wow. Like they were dead in the water without that. So
wow.
It was extreme foresight to grab it.
William Bond, fair play to you. From the point at which the whale first attacked to the escape from the capsizing ship, no more than 10 minutes had elapsed. Back though out in the open water, Captain Pollard and Joy's crew could only look on in disbelief and confusion as they noticed their ship, the Essex, was on her side. Both crews immediately cut themselves free from the whales they were trying to kill, and they rowed hard back towards the spot where the ship should have been, trying to make sense of what they were seeing. Once they reached the wreck, Captain Pollard made the call. The first priority was to get as much food and water out of the wreck as possible before it went under for good, straight down to the up place. They scavenged what they could: casks of fresh water, tools and bits of equipment, a small but precious stash of boat nails, weapons too, including a musket and pistols. And they managed to haul out 600 pounds of hardtack, which is a very hard, dry, long-lasting cracker. Basically, it's made of flour and water. Real old-timey, disgusting shit. Yeah, but it will keep you going. The men also began stripping the sails off the ship to make new sails for their 3 surviving whaleboats, and they scavenged whatever timber they could to lash together masts. And yes, they even got their hands on some of them delicious Galapagos tortoises. Hey, you need some of them.
We're saved and back on the boat again.
Meanwhile, Pollard used the salvaged navigational gear to work out where they were. And with the ship gone for good, the news wasn't any better. They were about as far from land as you could get.
Here's an interesting theory. So the whaleman, they would often say that you could hear sperm whales through the hull of the ship. It was like a steady series of clicks, almost like hammer blows. The sound, it was so similar that sailors even had a nickname for the animal, the carpenter fish. And on the morning of November 20th, 1820, sperm whales were not the only creatures filling the ocean with clicking sounds. If you remember, Owen Chase, he was hammering away too, busy trying to nail the canvas across the bottom of his damaged whaleboat.
Right.
So with every blow against the wood, it would have travelled down through the whale ship and out into the water. Now, whether the bull mistook it for another whale or it took it as a challenge, no one can obviously say for sure, but some reckon that the hammering is what drew its attention to the Essex in the first place.
That's an interesting theory. Yeah. That him trying to repair the whaleboat brought this bull whale, this pissed off bull whale, and interesting.
It's why he got so mad.
Yeah. And then the Essex goes straight down to Davy Jones' locker. So now they are out at sea. The Essex has gone straight down, and there's 3 whaleboats with 20 people?
20 people, yep.
Spread out among the 3. And they are about 1,500 miles off the coast of South America.
They're screwed. Yep.
They're supremely screwed. So once the crew has scavenged as many supplies as the whaleboats could carry and finished equipping each boat with 2 short masts and sails, it was time to come up with some sort of variation on a plan. Captain Pollard, he grabbed the navigational instruments and the nautical charts, then pulled his 2 mates, Owen Chase and Matthew Joy, close enough to talk through what's the plan? What are we going to do next? Since their sail-equipped boats could only really travel with the wind, their options were pretty limited. They could backtrack east, roughly 2,000 miles to the Galapagos Islands and then onto South America. So I was even way off. It's 2,000 miles just to the Galapagos. And then it's even further to South America.
Yeah.
So they were really screwed. That felt impossible to Pollard, and I don't blame him for thinking that. They could sail west either, though. That was also on the table. The closest land that way was the Marquesas Islands. It's about 1,200 miles to the west. A few hundred miles south of that sat the Tuamotu archipelago. The problem, though, with that was, well, the Essex men had heard stories of the natives there in this part of the South Pacific, and the stories, as you can imagine, around this time, all had the same variation of cannibal to them. South Pacific Islands, you're going to have some kind of cannibals on them. That's what they all believed and the stories they had heard. So they decided probably best not to go towards the cannibals.
Good call.
Further west, again though, were also the Society Islands, around 2,000 miles away, so even further. Now, Captain Pollard did not have much information, but he believed they were the safer option, and could reach them in about 30 days, hopefully. Chase and Joy, his first and second mate, they pushed back on that idea. Again, they had heard rumors of cannibalism on the Society Islands. They were like, I'm not having any of that. No cannibalism for me, thanks, I'm good. Instead, they proposed sailing south, about 1,500 miles. Then catching winds there could carry them east towards Chile or Peru. Best case scenario, they reckoned, sure, it'll only take us about 60 days. Best case. And just like the storm decision that happened days after leaving Nantucket, Pollard, he didn't pull rank. He went with the option that his two mates were arguing for, a decision that would seal the fate of more than a few. Was Captain Pollard, I mean, he had been first mate before being captain, but it seems like he was not very confident guy, or was he inexperienced, or...
Well, it was the first time being captain, but it was weird. It's like he took a very democratic approach, which I suppose like on small decisions is fine, but like for these like big sort of life-changing decisions, like you need a leader. You need someone kind of, this is what we're doing, especially in these like where you need quick decisions.
Yeah.
It's like, listen, this is what we're doing this now. And like you needed the experience.
You need somebody to take over.
Yeah. Instead he was kind of like, he was letting everyone have their say.
Yeah.
And then he was like, okay, and it just ended up making the very wrong call when he should have went with his gut. Really, like the bitter irony is that their fear was really outdated. Contemporary accounts note that both the Marquises and the Society Islands, they would have been safe destinations for sailors by that time. Honestly, like their ignorance of the Society Islands, it's a bit shocking for these apparently like seasoned sailors, given like the English missionaries had established on Tahiti since 1797. So ironically, trying to avoid cannibalism is exactly what steered them straight into it.
Yes, that's exactly what happens, folks. So with the plan set, they were going to go south and then catch winds to take them east. They split the crew across the 3 whaleboats. There was Pollards, there was Chases, and there was Joys. Each boat was issued 200 pounds of hardtack, 65 gallons of water, and of course, 2 Galapagos tortoises. To keep discipline, Pollard gave each mate a pistol and powder, but he kept the musket for himself. To ensure their provisions lasted the 2-month journey, they rationed it out so that each man would get 6 ounces of hardtack and half a pint of water a day. This worked out to be about 500 calories a day, and this is in the South Pacific. This is October, which is spring for them. They have no cover.
Yep.
It's hot. Basically, and it's very sunny. Yes. So half a pint of water on the open ocean. It's salty in the air already.
Yeah, exactly.
That would have sucked, basically. Yeah.
And I would say like the provisions they had, it was literally just to get them to 2 months. That's all they had. If they had gone with Pollard's first decision, it would have had like a pint of water.
Yeah. They deliberately were like, let's do the hardest.
Yeah.
And the brutal rationing wasn't the only thing wearing the men down. They were constantly soaked from the salt spray, and within a few days their skin began to blister and split into painful sores. And then in the inky black nights came another fear, the boats getting separated. It wasn't just the fear of drifting away from the rest of the crew. It was that they didn't have enough navigational equipment to go around. So, if a boat vanished into the night, they would never find the others again, or probably wouldn't even find land at all.
They did consider trying to tie the boats together. However, like this would have interfered with their sailing ability and would have slowed them down, which they were already on the time clock here. They literally only had 60 days to get where they were going.
It was on the morning of Friday, November 24th, that they hit a run of massive waves that broke clean over their boats. Chase's boat took the worst of it, and the men bailed out frantically, knowing the next wave could sink them. When they finally came out on the other side, they discovered some of their hardtack had been soaked true with salt water. They did manage to dry it out over the next few days, but the salty hardtack, that was the last thing dehydrated men needed, and it was what they got.
And this was really, like, this was the men's string of bad luck. It was relentless. On the 6th night, screams they tore out through the darkness from Captain Pollard's boat. So the others shouted across the black water, asking what had happened, and they received a terrifying answer. Pollard's boat was being attacked by killer whales. So they had slammed into the whaleboat with their head and their tail hard enough to jolt the whole thing. So the crew, they were swinging at the shapes in the water with the poles until finally the creatures, they decided to back off. But the damage had been done. They ended up splitting the boat's stem, and it was started to take on water. Pollard, he ordered all their provisions to be loaded onto the other 2 boats. The boats, they then spent the night huddled close together, terrified that the whales, they might return. By the morning, they managed a rough repair, nailing strips of wood over the split and tightening everything they could, but it wasn't pretty, but it held. And once again, they pushed on.
And the men kept running into rough seas, battered by hard winds and cold rain. They tried to catch drinking water by spreading their sails and collecting a runoff in the folds of the canvas, but it was no use. The sailcloth was soaked true with salt spray, so basically whatever rainwater they gathered was contaminated by the sea regardless, and it just made them sicker. After 17 days adrift, starving and thirsty, with the boats barely holding together, they had covered close to 1,100 nautical miles. But the easterly winds had been working against them the whole way, pushing them west. So despite all that effort and that time, they were now even farther from South America than they had been when they started. Worse still, around this point, they were drawing abreast of the Society Islands. If they had turned and run west with the wind and with the current, they could have reached Tahiti in a matter of weeks, with the sea doing most of the work instead of them fighting for every mile. But Pollard chose to stick with the original plan. That was not his idea, and they kept pressing towards South America.
Now, after battling with the winds for so long, they were about to face the exact opposite problem. The breeze died completely, and the boats, they were left dead in the water.
Oof.
So with no movement, they had to cut rations again. So the hardtack was halved just to 3 ounces a day, but to keep dehydration at bay, they had to keep the water ration to half a pint per man per day. But the casks, they were running low. And like as the unrelenting sun was beating down on their blistered bodies, they'd swish seawater in their mouths just to, wet their cracked lips, even though it only made things worse. They also started drinking their own piss, which probably not in that order.
Yeah.
I'll probably do the piss first, then the salt water.
Yeah, exactly. Well, hey, did we have already? Yeah. Man, that's things just went from bad to worse.
It was bad.
Truly from bad to worse.
It was terrible. And also when I was reading the book, I was like, why don't they just fish? But basically, they were like in this part of the sea. It was like the desert of the sea. There was nothing.
It's like a dead zone.
Yeah, there was no like marine life there at all. So
except killer whales or
except
something.
Killer whales. Yeah, but they couldn't catch any fish either.
Wow.
So they were like, they were screwed.
I guess it was just a place where there was fish, but no like top level fish. Fish near the surface of the water. It's probably like deep level shit.
Yes,
sharks and shit like that. Fucking great white sharks and shit.
Yeah, exactly.
Man, I'm not gonna lie, wouldn't have liked to have been there.
No, I don't think I'll be a whaleman.
No, I'm good for now. On December 19th, with provisions nearly gone and the men on death's door, one of the crew yelled out, "There is land!" The men happened to come across Henderson Island. Now, not the lush, palm-covered Salvation they had been dreaming of. Instead, it was a jagged, wind-beaten lump of coral and scrub, with sharp black stone underfoot and seabirds screaming overhead. Like literally what you think of as a desert island. This is a desert island. There was nothing there, just rock. But it was solid ground. They staggered ashore half crazed with thirst, mouths split, skin hanging off them like salt-crusted rags. And for the first time since the Essex went down, they were not balancing on a coffin made of planks. They even managed to find a little fresh water, and they gathered crabs and birds to eat. However, in just 5 days, the crew had exhausted a large portion of the small island's resources. It was simply, staying here was not sustainable, and they would have to get moving. But it was at least a little bit of respite from the sea.
True, yeah. And like they also quickly realized as well that the island, it was quite far from any shipping lanes. So chances of being able to flag down a passing ship were like slim to none. So by December 26th, they had resolved to abandon the island. However, 3 men, they decided to stay on the island, unable to face getting back into the whaleboats. And honestly, like who could blame them? Also, no objection was made, as this would mean that there'd be more provisions to share around. So the crewmen were like, oh no, okay.
Yeah. So, again, moving forward, the 3 men who decided to stay, actually, that was a good decision.
That was a good call.
That was a good call.
Yeah.
Staying was a good call. Captain Pollard, he assured the men that if they did make it back to South America, he would do everything in his power to see that they were rescued. And so, on December 27th, 17 shipmates headed back to the open ocean on their repaired boats with provisions of fresh water and what little fish and birds they managed to catch on the island. Pollard, he set a course for Easter Island. They did not know much about it, but whatever was waiting on that speck of land had to be less terrifying than the open ocean. And more importantly, it was far closer than South America. But on January 4th, they realized the wind and current had pushed them too far south to have any real hope of making Easter Island. So they were forced to pick a new target, Masa Fuera, a lonely island a few hundred miles off the coast of Chile. The problem was, it was only about, 2,500 miles away, an obscene stretch of water for 3 whaleboats, and further than they had even traveled since the Essex went down. It's like, after all this shit they've been through, they're not even halfway there.
I know, we need to do it again, and then some.
Yeah.
So by then, the provisions, they were nearly gone, and starvation, it was closing in again. Second mate, Matthew Joy, he had actually been sick for quite some time. I think he was sick since like nearly the Essex. And the toll of thirst and hunger, they finally finished him off. On January 10th, Joy died, and he buried him at sea. Pollard appointed boat steerer Obed Hendricks to take command of the second mate's boat.
The very next day, another storm hit, and Chase's boat was separated from the other two. Days dragged by in a blur of heat and weakness. By mid-January, the men were so far gone they could barely sit upright without blacking out. And then, on January 20th, one of Chase's crew, Richard Peterson, he reached his limit. He refused his tiny ration of bread, slipped into unconsciousness, and died soon after. They tied a weight to him and lowered him into the sea. The same grim ritual as Joy. On that same day, back with the other two boats, a fella named Lawson Thomas, a crewman in Hendrick's boat, also reached his limit and he died. The rations were down to almost nothing. With barely enough hardtack left to go around, the word they had been, avoiding, it had finally arrived. Cannibalism. For the starving men, in order to stay alive, they knew what needed to be done. The ritual of the sea. What happened next was grim, practical, and quiet. They likely removed the parts that made him feel too, sort of human-y. Anything that made him look and feel like a man, anything recognizable. They then took what little meat and organs they could, lit a small fire on a flat stone, cooked, and chomped down. 2 days later then, on January 23rd, Charles Shorter, another man from Obed Hendricks' boat, died, and he too was eaten. Then Isaiah Shepherd followed on January 27th, and Samuel Reed then on January 29th. In the space of just over a week, 4 men were gone, and the line they thought they would never cross had become routine.
So on the night of January 29th, Pollard and Hendrick's boats, they fought to stay together, but they just didn't have the energy to row hard enough to close the gap when they started to separate. In the dark, they lost sight of each other. Hendricks and his men, they slipped away into the Pacific. With no navigational equipment or instruments, they were just swallowed by the night, and they were never found alive.
On February 6th, the 4 remaining men on Pollard's boat, having consumed the last scraps of Samuel Reed, were left with one question hanging in the air. Who was next? They were close to death themselves, and they decided they would not wait for someone to simply drop. They would cast lots to decide who would die so others could live. They tore up a scrap of paper, dropped the pieces into a hat, and drew. The lot fell to Owen Coffin, Captain Pollard's own cousin. Pollard broke. He cried out that if anybody touched his cousin, Owen Coffin, he would shoot the first man who touched him. He then offered to take the lot himself, but Coffin had already accepted it. He looked at him and said, "I like it as well as any other." They drew again, this time to decide who would actually do it. The lot fell to Coffin's friend, Charles Ramsdell. At first, he refused. Then in the end, he submitted. He raised the pistol and shot his friend dead.
So after this, it was only 5 days later that another crew member on their boat, Brazili Ray, he died. By the way, somewhere out in the vast ocean, Chase's boat, this was still adrift. They had managed to last this long thanks to Chase's strict rationing, but they were barely functioning. Hunger had taken all their strength. They were too weak to properly sail at all. They weren't travelling so much as being carried, drifted by whatever wind and current decided to take them wherever.
On the morning of February 8th, Chase's crew member Isaac Cole began to spasm violently, completely out of control. By afternoon, he was dead. Chase's boat still had not crossed that line, so they spent the night with the corpse beside them, trying to hold on to whatever was left of their humanity. But by the next day, survival won, and they did what they had to do to stay alive, which is nom 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 nom. Then, on the morning of February 18th, when Chase and his men had all but given up, one of the men spotted something in the distance and cried out, "There's a sail!" It was probably more like, "There's a sail." They summoned what little energy they had left to row towards it, desperate to cross its path and be seen. Eventually, someone on deck spotted them, and the ship lowered sail, allowing the whaleboat to limp in alongside. The 3 survivors, Owen Chase, Benjamin Lawrence, and Thomas Nickerson, were hauled up onto the deck of the British ship, the Indian. They were nothing but bone and burnt, blistered flesh. When they were finally rescued, it had been 89 days since the sinking of the Essex. It would not be until February 23rd that another ship called the Dauphin came across Pollard and Ramsdell, alone in a whaleboat filled with human bones. The men were found half delirious, sucking the marrow from what was left, with their pockets stuffed with the finger bones of their deceased shipmates. That is grim.
It is
and
grim.
metal is all hell.
Yeah, right. Yeah.
After they were given proper food and water, Pollard slowly began to come around. The Dauphin brought Pollard and Ramsdell into the port at Valparaiso, where, weeks later, they were reunited with the other survivors, Chase, Lawrence, and Nickerson. And Pollard, true to his word, alerted people of the 3 men who had stayed behind on Henderson Island, choosing the risk of wading on the barren rock over the certainty of dying in a whaleboat. And Thomas Chappell, Seth Weeks, and William Wright, somehow, against all odds, had lasted there for months. In April 1821, an Australian trading vessel called the Surrey finally found them and pulled them off that island alive. And as much as it would suck to have been them, because they had to survive longer, I would still rather stay on the island.
Yeah, and they avoided cannibalism.
They avoided cannibalism. Yeah. I mean, I know they had eaten all the shit on the island, but I mean, there's only 3 of them. More crabs. There will be more crabs from the sea. Yeah. It will rain. We'll get more fresh water.
Yes. Yeah.
Okay, it certainly wouldn't have been enough for all 20 of them, or however many there was.
But for the 3 lads.
It was grand. Sure, they had a pretty fucking great time.
Just
there.
enough, exactly.
Yeah, they were fucking having a...
It was like a holiday.
Yeah, basically, yeah. What you want to stay? Yeah.
God, that must be like an awkward conversation for when Chase met back up with Pollard.
Yeah.
And it was like, oh, we had to resort to cannibalism. We had to eat one of our crew.
Yeah.
Like,
his finger bones.
We've eaten everyone.
Yeah. Finger bones jingling in his pocket.
Yeah. A necklace.
Yeah. Oh, sorry to hear that. The survivors who made it home back all the way to Nantucket were never the same again. Surprisingly, I thought they'd be fine. Get over this. Owen Chase, he returned to Nantucket June 1821 and wrote his account of the ordeal almost immediately. Some years later, Thomas Nickerson's own manuscript, that would surface. Another voice from that open water nightmare, telling the story from the inside. All in all, 8 men lived. 12 died, and one guy, Henry DeWitt, made the really smart choice of abandoning ship back in somewhere in
Ecuador
or somewhere, and he was reading the story, he's like, fuck that. Yeah.
Dodged a bullet there.
Yeah.
As for Pollard, so he eventually took command of another Nantucket whale ship called the Two Brothers. He told himself, lightning, it wouldn't strike twice.
The worst thing in the history of the universe has already happened to me. It can't get any worse.
Can't happen again. But on the night of February 11th, 1823, in a storm in the northwestern Hawaiian Islands, Pollard lost his position and the ship ran onto a reef, sinking in less than 20 minutes.
Yeah.
Now, the crew escaped into small boats, and they were rescued the next morning by another whaler traveling along with them. But that was basically it for him and his whaling career.
He was like, all right, learned his lesson.
Well, not by his decision. It was 2 wrecks, 2 catastrophes, and his reputation on Nantucket, you just could not outrun that.
Oh, really? I was going to go back another time, actually.
He didn't own the ships. Someone else owned the ship. I'm not giving it to him.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, he could not get a job, I'm sure.
Oh, yeah, that was it. I think he ended up as a night watchman.
Well, I mean, I think that's a good thing because he sounds like he was cursed. Okay, well, there you go, folks. That's the story of the Essex. Wow, what a tale.
What a tale.
Crazy, interesting story.
What a tale of survival.
The will to live is strong.
In the end, the whale won.
The whale had the last laugh.
He did have the last laugh.
And we'll leave it there, folks. Thank you so much for listening to this whole episode of the TSP, the That Chapter podcast. Hope you enjoyed, and stay tuned for next week when we'll be telling another sort of story, I guess.
More tales
from the crypt of Mike and Keith. But until then, please take care of each other and yourselves.
And I'll see you.
All right, thanks, guys. Bye.